If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, and certainly if you've been reading the blog, you'll know I'm a big fan of using credit cards responsibly as a tool to earn rewards, build credit, and protect your purchases and travel. However, some people in our personal finance circles believe the best way to become debt-free and stay that way is to not allow yourself to have such easy access to spending and debt. Steve Stewart is the editor behind the MapleMoney Show, and we're in great company as he also edits podcasts like Stacking Benjamins, Choosify, and Afford Anything. Steve became debt-free, and a big part of that was avoiding credit cards. Steve shares his story today and gives some great rebuttals to my examples of times that we might need a credit card. Welcome to the MapleMoney Show, the podcast that helps Canadians improve their personal finances to create lasting financial freedom. Later in this episode, Steve mentions the importance of checking our credit reports for signs of fraud and other errors. Our sponsor Borwell provides free credit reports, so you can ensure it's correct and take the steps to fix it if needed. To get your free credit report, head over to maplemoney.com/Borwell today. That's maplemoney.com/BORROWELL. Now let's chat with Steve. Hi Steve, welcome to the Maple Money Show.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
I wanted to have you on. People that listen to the show or read my blog, they know I'm very pro credit cards, but I do realize there's a lot of issues with credit cards. So I wanted to bring you on because you're very anti-credit card. I guess right from the start, do you currently use credit cards at all?
I don't have a credit card. I haven't had one in over 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that amazing? How do you live in America or Canada without credit cards? I guess you're going to find out soon.
Yeah, I agree. That's I didn't realize you still didn't have one. I thought maybe you would have softened your stance, but you're still going without it. Okay, well, right from the beginning, I guess what made you decide to no longer use a credit card?
I'll try to keep the story short because it really can get into the whole I drank the Kool-Aid of Dave Ramsey story. I bumped into him while listening to the radio while I used to drive around a lot for work, and I'd just play the radio because we didn't have CD players and MP3 players in the car. And I challenged everything he said, but I found out that a lot of what he said was right. And it was me who was the one who just didn't open my mind to all of the other things. I was listening to the traditional advice on credit and borrowing money and leverage and all this other stuff. And then I also challenged the things he was using scripture, and I'm a Christian. So I was saying, well, wait a minute, he's using scripture here about money, and dug into it deeper and found out that my belief system really fell in line with what he was teaching. And one of those things was to not borrow money. And as we know, credit cards, whether it's a 30-day revolving credit or it's, just until the next bank statement comes out, credit cards is borrowing money. And so I made a decision in 2007. It was the same time my wife and I decided that's it. We're getting out of debt completely. We had paid off our last consumer debt, which was a car loan. And ever since then, I haven't had a credit card and I haven't had any consumer debt at all. And in fact, in 2015, my wife and I paid off the mortgage early. So we have no debt, period.
Yeah, that's great. I do still have a mortgage, and I know it's a common thing to say you're debt free, but yeah, you don't count that 6-figure debt that you're living in. Okay, so you stopped using credit cards. How was that at first? I'm thinking of things like, I remember when I was in college before I had a credit card, it was hard to even like get into a hotel room. And I don't mean booking online because it was barely a thing then. I mean, just even like letting you even get into a hotel room. They didn't want you there without some kind of protection.
Yeah, at first I thought it was going to be really difficult. And then when I was looking back at my usage, I tried, before I cut up my last credit card, before I canceled the last account, I always held on to it. It's like, well, I might need it for something. And the travel was one thing and, emergency fund. But then I realized I hadn't actually used one of the credit cards in over 6 months. And all the other ones I'd stopped using even before that. And so I was like, why do I even need this? So I decided at that point to make the jump. And it became easy after that because I had already conditioned myself not to use credit and just use debit. Now there are all of the fears, the worries about travel, like you said. And my wife and I, we've taken some fantastic vacations with our daughter. We've rented hotels, cars, obviously airfare. You don't need a credit card for that. You can buy with a debit card. I haven't found any reason not to use a debit card in place of a credit card. Excuse me, in place of a credit card, because it has essentially the same protections as a credit card. There are some things in the written words of debit card policies that say, oh, you could lose up to $50 and stuff like that. I have talked to people who have had their debit cards compromised, and in every single case, they have lost $0 in money. It might have cost them $4 to fax a form to create. I think that was years ago. It's even now it's more electronic and there's no charge in that. But, all of those fears just went away. So I haven't had any reason to have a credit card, and the debit card has been working great for me, plus cash and things like that.
You brought up the idea of sort of the risk that some people associate with it. And yes, it's the same in Canada, the $50 liability limit. But it seems to me that if it's coming out of your bank account, there's at least a bit of a risk there, just in sort of things unraveling on you a little until you get it sorted out, that someone drains out your money, where if it's with a credit card, someone's draining someone else's money that was never even really assigned to you once you make that fraud report.
Agreed. I get that because the fear is, okay, it's my bank account, and your debit card is that pipeline into the account. People can siphon money out. If they get your PIN number, then you lose the protections. But if they're using like a credit card, it goes through the same processes. I mean, as long as your debit card has got the Visa MasterCard logo on it, I know in the United States, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Canada, then you've got that zero liability protection. Now, if your account goes below zero because of fraudulent activity, well, the zero liability policy doesn't necessarily cover that, but your bank should be the one that steps in and say, okay, we realize that this is theft, and they should give you some forgiveness. And again, in every case where I've talked to someone, they have pretty much rebated all of the late fees if you go below zero. Now, I will say you shouldn't be living your life that close to the edge. If you've got $1,000 in there, it usually covers most of the fraudulent charges. Most fraudulent charges are not more than $500-600.
Okay.
If they are, then it's been going on a little bit longer. They usually hit you up for a $5 thing here, and then they go fill the tank with gas, and then they go buy the $100 shoes, and then they. For me, I had a business debit card that was used for a hotel room in the Bellagio. And my bank called me up and said, hey, are you in Vegas at the Bellagio? I'm like, no, I'm in St. Louis, Missouri. This is not me. That was $500, but it didn't drain the account or anything. So you shouldn't be living that close to the edge to where you're worried about those things. And the banks, they want to keep your business, so they'll work with you on all these, any kind of overdraft fees and things like that, as far as your personal bank account is concerned.
Yeah, you brought up Visa and MasterCard. Here in Canada, most of the debit cards, and we just commonly refer to them as bank cards. Instead of going through Visa and MasterCard, we have Interac here in Canada. But everything you said holds true. It's still that $50 liability.
Which I've not heard anybody ever have to pay, or that they've lost money on that. Not a single person ever stepped forward and said, yeah, I had to pay that $50, or, I didn't get the $50 back.
Yeah, and I don't have any personal experience with it. I have had it on the credit card side, similar to what you said with your debit card. I've had people, I had the bank reach out and say, like, is this expense in Boston yours? And no, I've never been to Boston, so it definitely wasn't mine. One thing that concerns me, and I don't have an example of this happening, but just in the wording with Interact is, and I'll quote it here. It's losses resulting from circumstances beyond your control when using Interact. Now, I don't know how this is getting enforced, but I do worry about what they might consider your control. This could apply to a credit card too, for that matter. Not that it's Interact, but just that idea that do they accuse you of being a little too loose with your PIN number, or where you left your card, or anything like that?
I obviously don't know what they mean. I would have to just give you a guess, but what it sounds like to me is exactly what you just said, is if you're giving your PIN number away. Your PIN number is kind of like, your personal thumbprint. You're saying, this is me and my alone. And it's that almost that dual authentication part where, okay, here's my piece of plastic and here's my 4-digit PIN that goes along with it. If they're not together, then they shouldn't work. You shouldn't be able to run any transactions through this account. So that's what I think is if they're talking about what was the thing you said was, beyond your control? If it's within your
Yeah, beyond
control,
your reasonable control. It might just be legalese to protect themselves, but I don't know if they're
sure.
enforcing it much.
Yeah, if I were to show my debit card number on the screen here, okay, there's somebody who's going to try and use it. If I gave you my PIN number as well, I'm out of luck then. I mean, I totally would own that because it would be stupid for me to do that type of thing. But I think if you take the regular procedures of, don't share your PIN number with anybody. If you've got to share it with your spouse at some point, try to encrypt it somehow, put it written into a safety deposit box. There's really very little reason that they should have their own access to the money anyway. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find reasons, and I really can't find one to prove your point.
I recently had to change my PIN number. I was at Walmart entering it in, thought I was being reasonably protective of it. And then my 9-year-old child yells out the number. he was reading it as I was entering it. He didn't know it before, but and he didn't realize the need to not yell that out in a store with hundreds of people around you. But
now wait a minute, Tom. Were you using a debit card?
Oh no, in Canada the credit cards are almost exactly the same. We use chip and pin.
Oh, I forgot that.
Yeah, I know in the States you guys are still catching up. You're starting to have the chip, but you often no pin, I believe. When I put my credit card when I'm traveling, I can put the chip in, but then it comes back out without me entering the pin, and it throws me off a bit because I'm like, I didn't authorize that yet. I didn't enter my pin. So credit cards and debit cards are very similar in Canada with the chip and pin.
Okay, I've forgotten about that because I haven't been to Canada yet, so apologize.
Yeah. No, it's all good. I don't expect you to be an expert in Canada. Where was I going with this? Okay. I will admit one of the biggest issues with credit cards is that, especially for some people, they're going to be a terrible choice because if you're using a credit card sort of beyond your means, you're not using it as that tool. You're using it to fund your Christmas purchases or something. That's a huge problem. So can we kind of go into how people can, again, live without credit cards, but how do they do it by not racking up debt in general?
How to use debit cards without racking up debt?
Yeah, payments and how to not use credit cards. What can they do to make sure they're paying for those Christmas purchases and things like that, and not using it as a crutch to fund future purchases?
Yeah, I think that whether you're using debit cards, credit cards, cash, check, Bitcoin, it doesn't matter because the whole idea is that you pay for what you buy. With debit cards, you're tying the purchase to your bank account. There better be money there. With cash, it's immediate, it's instant, it's limited because it's what you have in your physical possession. It's your hand. You could try and float a check, but it's the same thing as that debit card where if there's not enough money in your checking account, your bank account to cover the payment, you're in trouble. Where with credit cards, you've got that gap, that leeway for 30 days before they're going to penalize you with the interest charges or overdraft fees or whatever else might come across with it. So regardless of what you're using as your payment method, you need to have a plan in place of what you're going to spend. I'm going to use the word budget. Just knowing that you're going to spend $1,000 or $1,200 or $1,500 or $2,000 in the month of December for all the different things that are going on that don't usually happen in the months of January, February, March, April, May, June, July, and all the other ones. Let's start saving up for that because we know it's coming. It's obvious. There's also things like emergencies. You're going to have a flat tire, car repairs. You're going to have, we pay for our car insurance every 6 months. So I know that every 6 months there's a good, oh my gosh, we got an 18-year-old in the house. It's $1,200 for insurance now every 6 months, where it used to be half that for two of us. Those are things that, if we weren't planning for it, if we weren't saving up for it, then we would, obviously be in a lurch here. We'd be sucking everything out of our account. So I always like the feeling of having a nice safety emergency fund on the side, because then I can start to be a little more dangerous in my checking account to where I make $1,000 the bottom limit. $1,000 has now become the zero. And then I'll use something like, we personally use You Need a Budget. It's a wonderful software that allows you to have these digital envelopes. There's other digital envelopes and stuff out there, or you can just go back to the old fashioned paper envelopes and put actual cash in them. but building up incrementally for those charges or those expenses that are going to be coming in the future. So we'll use the example of the car insurance. Let's just say we'll just go to the paper envelope idea or the jar or whatever you want to call it. That's $200 a month for 6 months. So if I took $200 out of our account every 6 months, I already know it's spent, quote unquote, spent on our insurance. Then by the 6th month, I've got the $1,200. It's already been accounted for. It's not sucking at, all this money out of my bank account, and I can go ahead and pay the bill with no worries. I could do that digitally as well. Move it into like we do a lot of stuff every 2-3 months. We'll bank, quote unquote, bank on the side, our savings for those types of things: car repair, car replacement, home insurance, life insurance, the car insurance. Put those into a higher interest savings account, like an Ally Bank, or what's a good one up in Canada? We'll get you a good interest rate savings account.
We've got Tangerine Bank would be a good one, or EQ Bank. They both have high interest savings accounts.
Yeah, so we'll move those for a couple months, earn us another $3 or $4 in interest. Woo, and then when it's time, we'll move it back into our checking account and pay the bill. So there's the plan that really needs to be there to plan ahead for these expenses. And going back to what I mentioned earlier, which was the emergency fund, just knowing that it's there just in case, that it brings a lot of comfort and freedom to your life.
Yeah, not using your credit card as an emergency fund. I get to that. The problem of, say, something like a credit card as an emergency fund is it becomes a little too easy to call everything an emergency. There's no food around. Pizza's now an emergency, and then it's a little too easy to spend with a credit card. And I have this problem sometimes. I always pay my credit card off in full. It's not not that kind of problem, but I probably do spend more than I would if I had the pain of pulling out cash, especially, let alone debit card, but pulling out real money instead of just that easy plastic card.
Yeah, and I do know for a fact I use my debit card for most of my purchases, and I will spend more than if I had the cash for it.
Yeah,
I don't think I spend too much more, but it's like, and sometimes I'll buy something, I'll know what the price is, but I don't even look at what I spent on the way out. And then I'll look at the receipt because I'll start entering it. I like to manually enter my transactions into YNAB. I know it's old fashioned, but I'll still enter it into my phone, and I'll be like, holy moly, what? Oh yeah, that's right. So if we're not looking at our purchases, if you're not getting that immediate feedback from handing cash over, there is a tendency to overspend. I'm not saying it does happen every time. I'm saying it could more easily happen.
Yeah, I also consider that for me at least, the Costco effect. You walk in for 5 items, and before you know it, you're walking out with some piece of furniture or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, and the beauty with having something like a YNAB, or I don't know if Mint does it because I haven't used it in so many years, but you can categorize your spending. So you got groceries, yep. You've got dining, you've got home expenses like your home repair stuff. You can, before you walk into the Home Depot or whatever you might have up north, you look and see, okay, we got $200 in our home repair fund. I can spend up to $200 if I had to. And if not, now I can have a conversation real quick on the phone with my wife saying, hey, I need this new storm door. It's $250. We got $200. What are we going to do? And then we make the decision there. We're in agreement. There's no argument later. There's no wondering where the money comes from because we had that little bit of a plan to start. We had the conversation going in. That way I was able to pay for it going out.
I really like that. Yeah, that's and yes, Mint does do the tracking as well. I use Mint. I don't look at it a lot lately, but it does do that tracking. I like to look at it, not with every purchase, but I certainly look at once a month or so that I'm still staying on track, kind of thing. It's nice to kind of see that you're sticking to it.
Well, does it keep a running tally during the month of what you spent, gauged towards what you expected to spend?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, like one thing that annoys me about it is my mortgage is biweekly, but I have a monthly budget there, and so every occasional month where I end up with 3 payments in the month, it tells me I'm over budget, and I'm like, well, I can live with that one because I'm paying my mortgage.
Yeah. But, okay,
cool. Another huge thing that people claim when they want to use credit is, I need to improve my credit score. And I think you're for a credit score, but can you kind of walk through how that works when you don't have access to credit normally?
Actually, I hate the whole credit score thing. I
Oh,
hate
okay.
it with a passion. I hate it because we've all turned this keeping our payment history clean into a game where we want the highest 3-digit number up to 850 that we can possibly get. I don't know what it is in Canada, but in the United States, we've got these 3 credit reporting agencies. They have all got their different measurements. 850 is kind of like the highest number you can get. And everybody's like, how can I make it better? How can I make it better? You don't use your credit score. You don't use your credit score. You don't actually use your credit score ever. The banks will if they're trying to make you a loan. So I get the idea that you want to have a really good number because the banks like to make it easy for them to just look at this number and say, oh, all these other places say that you pay your bills on time, you get a great number, so we'll make you this loan at a lower interest rate. I get that. I don't borrow money, so I have no need for a credit score. Period. I don't. What I do want, though, is to make sure I have a clean credit report. And I've actually just this last year, it was late last year, since my wife and I paid off our mortgage in 2015, all the old history of credit cards and the mortgage and everything dropped off of our credit report, or my credit report, I should say, to where I tried to pull it just to make sure there wasn't anything goofy going on. You know, sometimes there's errors that get reported on credit reports, and they couldn't pull me a report because there's nothing there. They think I'm dead because I have nothing to report. I have borrowed no money. I've paid back no money. I have nothing to report. So I essentially don't exist to Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, which are the 3 big ones here in the United States. I'm still around. I'm still alive. I'm still able to travel and you know, everything else I need to do. So I don't worry about a credit score because I'm not trying to play that game. And even if you did have a credit score and you want to improve your credit, it's super, super easy. You don't have to read all these articles, listen to all these people tell you what to do. The whole credit utilization thing just makes me angry because then they're talking about, hey, only use this percentage of your credit card, available credit card balance, and you got to add up all your cards and do it every month. No, just pay your debts and your bills on time. That's all you need to do. And you will have a good credit score. Now, what we don't want, whether it's me who doesn't care about credit, credit at all, and you want to have a good credit score, it doesn't matter. You don't want to have bad credit. That's what you don't want to have. So you don't want to, not pay your bills on time or not pay them at all. Avoid the late payments, avoid not payment and all that stuff. And you're going to have a good credit score. And it's that easy. Pay your bills and debts on time.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not overly worrying about whether you're in the very good range or the excellent range. Just don't be in the poor range. I do like what you mentioned about credit reports. Not the part that you can't get one. It would still be nice to see a clear one, just so you feel extra secure that nothing has popped up. But I guess you can still check it, and if something suddenly did show up, that's still your sign that someone might be using your identity.
Exactly. So if I go and I pull a report and it shows something, and obviously it's not mine because I've got a history of not borrowing money now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you disappear completely. I didn't think of that. They don't have anything to track anymore. So.
Yeah, on the traditional credit reporting side, yeah. The non-traditional way, there's ways to do it, but we won't go into that because it doesn't apply to every country.
Yeah, well, one thing I did want to go through, speaking of that, though, is can you kind of walk through what a company like it's called eCredible, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love.
Can you kind of walk through what they do, because I don't think there's anything like that in Canada, and for someone that sort of does need, maybe they want to get a mortgage or something, but they don't want to get a credit card. How can they start to establish that? Just if you could just kind of quickly walk through it, just to maybe give us an idea of what we could be doing here in Canada.
Yeah, and I totally get that. A bank is going to want to see that you have proof that you pay your bills on time. And I notice I didn't say debts that time, because if you're like me and you decide, let's say you're a high school student, let's say you're a college student and your parents are paying for your tuition, and you bought your car with cash, and you're trying to rent an apartment. Maybe the apartment place wants to make sure you're a credible person. Well, if you don't have any traditional credit, like a credit score to look at, then they're gonna be like, well, we don't even think you exist. Well, that's unfair. These credit reporting agencies, it's biased against people like me who don't borrow money ever, because there's nothing to show. And I get that. I get why they do that, but it's still biased against my type of activity. So if you want to prove that you're a good, credible source, you can go through old-fashioned terms, especially for a mortgage. There still exists, very little, but there still exists something called manual underwriting. And that's where the bank actually looks at pay stubs. They also look at your electric bills and all this stuff. Now, banks don't like to do that because it's time-consuming, and time is money. It's expensive for them to do that. So most banks will not do that when you've got a traditional credit score, and most people have a credit score. But there's these third-party services like eCredible that will, you're actually the customer here. You're the one paying eCredible to do a manual verification of whatever bills you want. By the way, they just launched a business credit product as well, which is very interesting. So if you're a business looking to establish a credit history for your business, but you don't borrow money, that's, again, the way to go. They basically will contact your electric bill company. They'll cable your phone bill, cell phone bill, whatever, and they will get manual verification that you've been paying your bills on time. And then they will provide that information to your lender. So the lender doesn't spend any time or effort having to do the work, but they're still able to do that typical same type of manual underwriting process just without having to do all the work to do it. Because they're getting not just you saying, oh yeah, I pay my bills and debts on time. They're getting it to you. A third party service is getting it to your lender for you to prove, hey, Tom does pay his phone bill. He does pay his electric bill. He does pay his car insurance every month. Mm-hmm. And that proves that you're a reliable person. And then they can make their determination on, how much they're going to lend you and all this other stuff based on the other information that they'll ask you for.
The only option I can think of that we have in Canada right now, and I wish something like what you just described would be here, but the only option I know of is we have secured credit cards where someone can put their money down and they're basically just borrowing from themselves. I'm going to assume you probably don't like those.
Well, if it's a credit card, yeah, I don't like those.
Yeah.
For many other reasons, not just that. I don't know what you can do in Canada. I apologize. I know that in the United States, they've also just Experian just launched Experian Boost, which does a similar thing of verifying other bills, not just debts. But I'll take your word for it.
No, it's still good to know about these American options because maybe we can help change that because I like these ideas that there's other ways to get that credit score that doesn't involve you going into debt when you're young just because you'd like to live in a house. Well, thanks for being on the show. Can you tell people where they can find you?
Sure. Everything I do is over at stevestewart.me, not .com, because the guy who owns that URL has had it for 21 years going on now, so I'm not going to be able to get the .com. It's Steve Stewart, STEWART.me. That's where you can find everything that I'm doing.
Sounds great. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Steve, for the inspiration that people can live without credit cards. While I love playing the credit card game, I realize that there are many Canadians out there that should not be using credit cards, not just for the risk of not being able to pay off their balance, but also for the increased spending that can derail your goals. You can find the show notes for this episode at MapleMoney.com/Steve Stewart. This week, I want you to look at your financial situation. What's your debt look like? What's it going to take to pay that off? How about your spending patterns? Maybe set up Mint to better review and see if you're getting in your own way. Then think hard about credit. Maybe credit cards are not for you. The rewards and insurance that come with them can be a great perk, but not if it's coming at the expense of goals like paying off debt and being able to retire comfortable. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you'll come back next week, where we'll have Nick Drew on to discuss his RV lifestyle.